Welcome to episode 27 of the Andrew Roman Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. How have y'all's week been? My week's been busy, man. For those that don't know, and you might be wondering, Andrew, what do you do during the rest of the week? I know you're like always preparing for these podcasts, and you spend hours and hours and hours of dedication and studyship. And yes, I do that. But other than that, I'm actually in real estate investment. And so it's been busy. A lot of people wanted to sell houses. We got to bless a lot of families and help them. But how was your week? Hopefully, we should be maybe returning to school for those that are still in school. I know I had a couple college friends go over to university now. And man, it's a different world we are walking into. Guys, it's already August. This is the craziest year it's ever been. First, I was like, you know what? It's February. You know, the world's... I wanted to slow down. And then COVID hit, and I was like, God, let's get this year over with. Anybody? Anybody else? But obviously, God has brought us so many blessings during this year, obviously. One of those blessings has been, I don't know you, but I felt like staying at home and being with family was something that was actually quite beneficial to me and kind of slowing life down a little bit. So anyways, just wanted to connect. Hey, always let me know your thoughts. Let me know your questions. We're about to get down into this episode. Hey, I always like to start with something special. I got one of my new mugs here. It's from NASA, Houston, Texas. That's right. It's for those that can't see, it's pretty nice. It's not like a sticker of the moon, but you have like the whole moon terrain, and then you have the footsteps of man that are actually like embedded into it. It's pretty dope. Fun fact about NASA, actually historic. NASA manned SpaceX capsule recently just landed in the Gulf of Mexico. So way to go, NASA. Way to go, Space Force. It wasn't the Space Force. It was NASA. But hey, so today, episode 27, I'm going to need the most time I can have. It's one of those long episodes. You don't want to tune out. You don't want to miss it. Don't tune out halfway. Make sure you listen to it. If you got to come back to it, you got to come back to it. But one of the ways that I stay informed, one of the ways that I stay sane in today's world is by reading. I always encourage you to read because, as they say, readers make great leaders. And I got two books I'm gonna kind of reference back to, but I want to talk about them real quick. It's called Intellectuals by Paul Johnson. Paul Johnson is a great author and historian, which looks deep into. He has a couple other books called Creatives, Civilization, a couple of other books here. And what this book is about is looking at the lives of some of the world's great intellectuals in the recent 200 to 300 years. Now, if you have like, okay, what the heck is an intellectual? So in this specific book, by the word that we're using, intellectual, is talking about people like Karl Marx, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, that's a French one, or Sartre, or Bertrand Russell, right? Or who else? George Orwell. All these are intellectuals. These are men and women, both men and women, that have tried to lead humanity through their intellect and have proposed great ideas for change. So, for example, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in France in the 1700s, he's someone who really started in getting the atmosphere ready for the French Revolution, right? And then you have Bertrand Russell, who was starting kind of the existentialism in Sartre as well in France. And so these are a lot of men and women who we're going to talk and describe them a little bit more, but these are men that thought that they could guide humanity by their unguided intellect. Right? Because at that point in the 1800s, 1900s, what could you rely on? You could rely on for wisdom, you could rely on tradition, you could rely on religion, on history, and you could kind of use all that as a sign of wisdom, right? For your life. But these people came into the world and said, no. I don't need history. I don't need religion. I don't need anybody else to tell me. I have the answer to humanity. I know how to fix humanity. Humanity's broken, and I know exactly how to fix it. So Karl Marx did that, right? And that's what started Marxism, and based on his name. So we're going to take a look at three aspects of these intellectuals, and then how these three aspects are now playing out even today. And you might think a similar way. So we're going to look at three things, and three ways that these, and there's a lot of subpoints, but three ways that these intellectuals thought and how even you right now, today, might be thinking the same way. And I want to suggest that's not the best way to think. So stick with me. I think this is going to be really, really good. And I read dude, this book is long, man. I don't know you, but look at that little font. I took a while to read this. So that's the first one, Paul Johnson, Intellectuals. And then there's this one, Intellectuals and Race by Thomas Sowell. Fantabulous, fantastic book. It talks about the role of intellectuals in kind of the race debate. Really since I would say the 20th century, late 19th century, maybe 1800s, 1900s, and the role that intellectuals played with that. Again, fantastic books. If you're more interested, definitely go into it. All right, enough introduction, enough setup. Let's get right into it. So there are 3 ways that these intellectuals communicated, and it was 3 ways that for them, it was all about truth. They were pursuers of truth. So the first one that we see, and this is how people are communicating nowadays, is with brutal honesty. Now, that's the first one. It's kind of like this honesty, that honesty equals to truth. Just because you're honest, you're obviously right because you're really honest. Then the second thing is that they believed that they were the holders of truth, right? That history didn't have truth. Religion didn't have truth, but they themselves knew what was right, and they themselves had the solution. And then the last thing is all that equal to ideas becoming worth more than the person. So we're going to walk all through them. So let's start with the brutal honesty. So I didn't know if you know this. I don't know if you know this, but have you ever paid attention why it's easier to believe someone who cusses than someone who doesn't? Think about this. They actually made a study, but someone who curses while they talk, and it's a little bit more vulgar, seems to be more believable. More like they have to be telling the truth because they're adding all these curse words to it, right? In our society, we value things like being brutally honest, being raw. Like we want to be raw in this society. And if someone's raw, then they must be right. And this is what happened with these intellectuals. They actually wrote a lot of self-biographies. And these biographies were raw. Nothing was hidden in these biographies. And it made it seem that because they were raw, they must be telling the truth, when in fact they were very, very deceitful in their biographies. They would completely switch situations around, where, for example, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example, he was just a grown-up kid, or a kid who never grew up, and he was hosted by many families in France. And back then they would have like families with like big houses, and they would share the houses. Well, this guy couldn't even hold a living for himself, so he would just jump from house to house to house. And then in one of the arguments he had with one of the owners is he had an argument because the owner wasn't kind of kicked him out of the house. And in his self-biography, he put the situation very raw, but instead he made himself look like the good guy, and then he made the owner look like the total bad guy. So it wasn't the rawness that people try to believe him, but in fact, it didn't matter if it was raw, it was actually inaccurate. But what's very interesting is that same aspect of intellectuals wanting to be authentic or wanting to be brutally honest, and then expecting people to believe them. We see this even now, even through social media and all that. It just seems like if someone uses a curse word, or if someone's mean and just like brutally honest, they must be right. And this is where you saw these. I mean, Twitter is full of it, right? Twitter is savage, and that's the whole point of Twitter, right? You have to get into how many characters, like so little characters, so you don't have time to explain, you don't have time to put any context. You got to get to the point. And it's the most brutally honest point that you can do, the most savage way that you can do it, because then you're going to get the most tweets. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're right, because it's the same thing. Like I saw so many things whenever we're talking about like systemic racism and all these words. I saw this. Okay. Here we go. Here's an example. So I saw this video on TikTok, and it was about this guy who said, you know what's interesting is that Jesus was a person of color, and he was murdered by the authorities of that. And what's interesting is a lot of you white people say that it's bad for Jesus to be killed, but he was a person of color killed by the authorities. Think about that. So it's kind of like, okay, all right, here we go. Just because it was it sounded good just because you seem to be like very passionate on the way that you said it, very raw on the way you said it, and you called people out. Doesn't mean you're right. And by the way, that argument makes no sense, because if you're going to use that, then he was killed by people of color. He wasn't killed by white people, okay? It was a color on color crime. But that has nothing to do with that. Just to use the story of Jesus to try to implement somehow that white people don't really care about black people is completely ridiculous. So moving on from that example. So we have to understand that just because people are brutally honest, or they're genuinely honest, doesn't mean they're genuinely right. You can be genuinely wrong about something. And that's something so important for us to talk about, because people love to express themselves, and hey, have the right to express yourself. But just because you are raw about it, just because you're like, I'm just going to speak my mind, I'm going to express myself no matter what people think. Cool, express yourself, but you might be wrong. You might be wrong. We see that, and you're going to see more examples as we continue. So like I said, these intellectuals were very raw, but at the same time, very, very deceitful. And actually, one of the tests I wanted to share with you, which is so interesting, is that swearing, actually, there was a study done where they showed these people two fictitious witnesses of a crime. And one witness cursed in their testimony, and the other witness didn't curse. And what they found is that although people... So this is how it went. They asked people, hey, do you believe people who curse more than people who don't? And they're like, no, I don't think so. I don't believe that. And then later day, then they did a test of, they gave them a witness. Again, the witness cursed in their testimony, and then the other witness didn't curse. And what they actually found is that people found more valuable and more reliable testimony on the person who cursed. Again, you can say this is a problem or this is an effing problem, and people are like, wait a minute, he used the F-bomb. It must be a serious problem. And again, that's not necessarily telling of the truth. So I just want to challenge you. It really doesn't matter how passionate we are about something. We can be passionately wrong. There has to be other methods of finding the truth. That's not just our emotions. It's not just our honesty. And so I want to move to part number 2, because I think we're going to spend a little bit of time on part number 2. And this is that they believed that they were the holders of truth. As I previously said in the episode just a couple minutes ago, is that they thought that they were here, that they came into the earth and the world was lost until they came in. They kind of saw themselves as a messianic figure, as a savior to humanity, right? Karl Marx saw himself, Rousseau saw himself, Shelley saw himself. All these are great intellectuals. And again, read this book to read more about their lives. And by the way, what I love about this book is it completely exposes the hypocrisy of these people, because whenever they claimed to love humanity, they claimed to... Oh, man, I'm going to save that. I'm going to save that for a little bit later in the episode. But they were just complete hypocrites, which we'll talk a little bit more. But the one subpoint here in the holders of truth is that they thought that they could guide humanity by their unguided intellect, that they could tell people how to live and their lives, not because from experience, not because they lived it right, but it's because they had theorized the ideal life and really just taken everything into consideration. They're like, this is not hard, just follow what I tell you and everything's going to be okay. There's a certain element of this with this woke culture that we're currently living in. It seems like we're the first, and I've said it before, people act like they're the first righteous people to live on earth. This is why I'm kind of against in putting down statues, and especially statues like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln or Theodore Roosevelt. Like, I get it if the guy was literally all about slavery and is a Confederate guy who's, okay, I get that. Sure, there might be an argument. But whenever you have these people that they say, well, how dare he, we must take it down because he was a slave owner. Okay, first of all, we don't build monuments to celebrate the evil things in people. Like I've said it before, I love Martin Luther King Jr. He had a problem with women. We don't build statues for him because he had a problem with women. We do it because he was a great leader, man of faith, and man of valor that led a civil rights era. That's why we built statues for him and monuments for him. And it's the same thing with people. But it seems that perspective comes from a self-righteous perspective, saying, I am a better human being born in 2020 than a human being in the 1776. Because I see things more morally, there's no problem in my life. I can judge forthrightly to those evil men. It's not like they were people of their time and they did great things, but somehow I know better in 2020. And what's so interesting is that right now, the total population of the world, in at least a couple years ago, is only about 7% of the total amount of humans that have ever lived in the recorded history. So we're only 7% of the people right now alive of the total amount of people that have ever lived in history. And you're telling me that right now, today, I know better than the combined history and knowledge of the extra 93% of people that came before me. That's completely, that's ignorant, and that's totally self-righteous to believe that. But this is what these intellectuals believe, and I believe this is what a lot of woke people and young people in this generation think, that somehow, not with their unguided, their passion, they're going to know better than people 100 years ago, than people 200 years ago. But what they don't realize is the very perspective that you have today, where you are standing right now, you're standing on the shoulders in the sacrifice of people in 1776, of people in the 1800s. You're standing on the shoulders of Frederick Douglass in 1865. You're standing on the shoulders of MLK in 1965, in the 1960s. So one thing that we have to understand is no, we don't necessarily know better. We can know better because when we look at history, but it's not because we're somehow special and somehow have this self-righteousness. We got to get completely rid of that. And the second part to that is that history is not the friend of the intellectual and it's not the friend of the woke person. I'll say that again. History is not the friend of the woke or the intellectual. And here's why. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9 says this: what has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. You've probably heard that sentence. You didn't even know it was in the Bible. It is. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. There's nothing new under the sun. So all these ideas and all these woke ideas and leftist ideas that our culture and my generation are trying to propagate in like socialism or identity politics or social justice, whatever other utopian idea that is being right now expressed, it's already been tried and it has completely failed in history. But instead, we say that we know better than history does and somehow we're different, right? This is why people who want to dismantle American systems, right? You want to dismantle America because we know how to build it better. And it's not like we're currently benefiting from that system, but we know how to build it better. So I'm going to give you some examples. Whenever people talk about socialism, and again, there is still a craze for socialism. I cannot believe this. Have you ever asked yourself what immigrants even come to the U.S.? If the U.S. was such a systematically racist country, a patriarchy of white men who only the capitalist rich make it in America, why do you think people still come to the U.S.? Is it because they're dumb? Is it because they're ignorant? Or is it because of the places where they used to live and they're like, America is the home of the free and the home of the brave? Like, that is America and that's what I want. So I ask an immigrant where they're from and see if you want to trade countries with them, and especially from a socialist country. So socialism has completely failed every time. We've had several episodes where we brought it up. It has failed every time, whether it's in Venezuela or whether it's an element of Russia or in other countries. And then you see this in China. Communism, very similar than socialism, not exactly the same, but similar. And you can't really name one place where it has succeeded. And every time they try to name a place like Norway or Denmark or Finland or Sweden or the Nordic countries, you have to understand that those are countries with capitalistic foundations with socialist programs. That's it. They're capitalistic in framework and in nature, but they just have a lot of socialist policies and like college and everything. But what you have to understand is like you get taxed the equivalent to 55.9% if you earn more than $65,000. So if you wanted to earn a lot of money, good luck. Because over 50% of your money is going to the government. So yeah, not much of a success. And then people say, well, no, what I want is the group identity. You see, right now we're playing, I think, a group identity. This whole thing of white privilege. You're only a white person. You can't really say, or if you're a black person, this is extremely dangerous. What you have to understand is, and I'm going to say the left, but there is a movement in the U.S. right now that wants to see everyone as a group. You're either male or you're female. So it's a male against females. It's the rich versus the poor. It's the black versus the white. It's all these separations of groups. And this is extremely dangerous because this group identity and group ideology is extremely dangerous because it is the base ideology that caused mass murder in like Mao's China or Hitler's concentration camps, and also the basis of eugenics. And that is whenever they wanted to eliminate a certain race because they thought that some races were inferior and some other races were superior. So whenever you stop seeing people as individuals and merely part of the collective, you wrongfully charge innocent people for the sins of other members of the group. Again, this is what happens with white people, right? With other white people, I'm not a racist person, but just because there might be another white person who's racist, just because I'm white too, now I'm racist. Now and this is so sad, I am guilty until proven innocent. Have you noticed that in our society? We have now become a society where you're guilty until proven innocent, especially in the case of race. Unless you show that you're anti-racist, you are racist, period. I don't have to have any proof. You just are because of your skin color. Now, if that's anything against the words of Martin Luther King Jr., that we should not judge someone by the color of the skin, by the content of their character, yeah, that's probably it. But that comes from group identity. And guys, it has never worked. You start, like I mentioned, you wrongfully charge innocent people for the sins of some other members. And we don't do this right when it comes to the black culture, which I'm glad because it's completely wrong. We don't say, even though the black population, statistically speaking, I'm not a racist, it's just a statistic, is that black people commit more of the crimes than white people do. But I don't see a black person think, criminal. No, not at all. I don't even know the guy. The guy might be a great guy. So why do you look at white people and say racist? You don't even know the person, right? But there's a whole agenda of trying to divide this country. And same thing with the social justice that's going on right now. Social justice only divides because what happens is that you use words like systemic racism, white guilt, white privilege, and what this causes is a disparity between races. Because now instead of me just looking at a black guy and being that's just a dude. Now I got to think, he's a black guy. I hope I'm white. I hope he doesn't think I'm racist. Is he okay? Should I smile? Should I say, hey, am I being nice? That guy's just a guy and I'm just a dude too. So we have to move from this, and we have to understand that in Germany, in the Czech Republic in the 1800s, this happened before. And this social justice happened. It happened in China, and it all started with small political changes. For example, the Czechs were jealous of the Germans, so they started forcing certain operas to have a certain quota of Czech music. This is happening now. We have mute white voices and elevate black voices. I'm all for elevating black voices as much as white voices because one's not greater than the other one. So we have made everything about race. In the early 1900s, Madison Grant wrote a book called The Passing of the Great Race. It's clearly wrong for a lot of people, but he was claiming the superiority of the white race over the black race. It is wrong for many, many, many reasons. But what's very interesting is that he was saying that any difference is of the outcome of successful people and poor people or not successful people is because of their race. It's purely genetic. What's really interesting is that now we have completely switched that now. Where now we believe that any difference between a race, between a white man and a black man, like if a white man is richer than a black man, is obviously racism. That's what we say. There might be a lot of other things. Before it was said it was genetics, just because the white person is better. Now it's like, no, it's not because the white person is better. It's because of obviously racism. And there could be other solutions. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to read that Intellectuals and Race by Thomas Sowell. He's really going to bring a lot into it. So I'm going a little bit fast because I want to get a lot into it. I don't have a lot of time. But I want to get to this because this is extremely powerful. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave us? Because we think that being raw equals truth. We think that we are pursuers of truth, but at the same time, we don't take knowledge from history and see how things don't work. And here's the last thing, is that all these intellectuals said, oh yeah, I'm a pursuer of truth. I want truth. But in fact, they were just merely for their own opinion. And they actually didn't want to pursue truth because they totally ignored facts and evidences that they contradicted their own beliefs. This is what I want to leave you with. Super important is that you don't believe that, okay, so what are you going to do when things contradict your ideas? Will you ignore it? Will you suppress it? Will you attack it? Or will you address it? is super important. Today, nowadays, we're seeing people suppress ideas. We have cancel culture. If I don't agree with it, suppress it, label it, racist, bigot, homophobic. And then, maybe I'm just going to ignore it. Nah, it's okay that fact totally contradicts what I believe. Nah, it's okay. Or you know what? I'm going to attack it. I'm going to attack the individual. What I love about Margaret Thatcher, she said a great quote. She said, "I always cheer up immensely if an attack is particularly wounding. Because I think, if they attack one personally, it means they don't have not a single political argument left." And that's completely true. If you get attacked personally, it's because the person doesn't even have anything to say against your argument. So will we ignore it? Will we suppress it? Or will we attack it? Or will we address it? And here's the problem. People are not addressing other arguments. So whenever I have a problem with Black Lives Matter, a lot of people will either ignore me, they will label me as I'm just white, and they will try to suppress me, or they will attack me and call me a racist, but no one will actually address it. Or when it comes to defunding the police or the US being systematically racist, let's have a conversation about it. Let's address it, but let's not attack it, let's not suppress it, and let's not ignore it. So those are the two things. Now let's move to the third thing, is that ideas are becoming more important than people. I'm going to leave you with this in the last couple minutes. What's happening is these intellectuals loved humanity, but they hated the human. This is what's going on right now. Because we're seeing people as groups and merely as ideas, people become the means to the end, and the end is purely an idea. And this is what's happening, right? For equality, we want equality, so we're going to riot for equality against this oppressive system. But in the meantime, we're going to destroy Black-owned businesses. We're going to cause the death of many Black people. We're not going to talk about it, right? Because they don't fit our agenda. But we're going to cause damage in businesses, damage in lives. We want to defund the police because we want to stop policemen from killing Black people. When in reality, that's not much of a danger if you look at the statistics. But now we're putting more Black people in danger because we're taking the police out of the inner city neighborhoods, and we're causing more violence to be in police in where there's more crime. But we do this all in the name of equality. So the idea of equality becomes more important than the actual lives that we're calling for equality for. So I want to put that. Are you more passionate for ideas than you are for people? And this is what happens. I want to leave you with this. If we make ideas more important than people, this is extremely dangerous. Stalin once said that the death of 1 million is a statistic, but the death of one is a tragedy. Think about that. If you were to reverse it, we live in a time that's completely reversed. That we rather see things as a group, so that way it's a statistic. But we don't want to see things personally because it becomes a tragedy. Someone will put the hashtag ACAP, all cops are, I'm not going to finish the word, but it's a cuss word, because that's a good idea. But you say that to a cop who's risking his life. You call them a B, whatever the word is. Oh, yeah, no, it's okay. We can... I'm all for equality, but you go and talk to the person that got their business destroyed by riots and tell me how good riots are now. So again, man, I'm pretty outspoken about this, but I want to encourage you. Are you really going to be for truth? Are you actually willing to address things and have tough conversations? Because if you are, if you don't ignore it, if you don't suppress it, and you don't attack things that you don't agree with, but you address it, there's the risk of you being wrong. But if there's a risk for you being wrong, then that means that you can change your mind and you can be right. Hey, we'll see you in the next episode of the Andrew Ramon Show. I know this was it was fiery, man. We got through a lot, but we'll see you guys. God bless you. We'll see you in the next episode.